Hey everybody, it's your boy, and today's video is going to be a quick one about what we can do to start and push our efforts into the wider world, into the real world, and away from more online spaces. Even though the internet and online freedom is very important, it's pretty clear that the culture war is not going to be won online, unfortunately. In my opinion, we've been on the internet a bit too long, and I can take a part of the blame for this as well, because most of the stuff that I do, in what I consider to be quote-unquote activism or commentary, has been pretty much mostly online. I have not done anywhere near enough IRL activism or just networking in general, and I feel like that needs to change at some point, time and money permitting. Whilst I would like to lecture people on why it's important, I think we all know, those of us who have a brain cell between us that is, why it's important because of the institutions and the governments and NGOs, even to the smallest school board, are all in real life and don't have very large internet footprints. And there's not much you can do from the internet to subvert these institutions and groups. So I'm going to talk about what we can do in order to rectify this issue. It's going to be difficult because most of us are in completely different countries, but I'm not arguing that we should jet set all over the world. I'm suggesting we start slower and smaller and network first off at the local level. So I guess our first thing that we should do is to network, and to do that we must network at the smallest possible level first, which is individuals who live near each other, whether that be in a city or a small town or even near other places. They may not necessarily have to be in the same urban or rural area, they just need to be close to each other and have a place where they can all meet. That's the first thing that needs to be done. Just being friends, going out there, talking to each other, go to a bar and have a drink. You can talk about politics, you can talk about things that need to be done. You can also talk about other things because by and large, these meetups will not just be about that. It'll be about having fun. It's about building up camaraderie and just having a good time. Morale boosting exercises. As much as I like to lampoon Patriotic Alternative for going on hikes, it does serve a purpose for them, and that is group bonding and obviously morale boosting. And also I guess there's probably a LARPing symbolism to all of that because they're hiking in the English countryside. I guess they're trying to remind themselves what they're apparently fighting for, even though what they're really fighting for is Germany. But things like that are actually not that bad, providing you actually do have work to do alongside that. The difference with Patriotic Alternative is they're not really doing anything, they're a big LARP. But we are different because we have bigger ideas, we know what we want to do, there's actually more of us, but the only way to get us to network and communicate is to have these small scale networking events. Then that can increase in size. You can start creating your own societies or even joining other societies. It doesn't even have to be a political society. For example, I believe that Turning Point or some other right-wing organisation in America started off as just like a skiing group or something, or just a group of friends chatting amongst themselves in a building during university, and then it became this transatlantic organisation with chapters in Britain and America and I think possibly even Canada. So whether that's joining your local conservative society, whether that's creating your own kind of conservative society or something entirely different, that will be the next building block. That is getting everybody together in a more formal structure. But remember, keep it small and build on top of these small things until you have a gigantic network, a good foundation for what you're trying to build. Because there are some people that I have heard about who have gone straight for the political party and managed to amass about several thousand followers, and they think that with those several thousand followers, and it wasn't too shabby, it was a small European country, I do believe, they thought they would get an MP or do well in the election. They barely got anything and were demoralised. It's important to keep grounded and realise, look, these are the building blocks towards a bigger party, a bigger goal. Once you've created these societies, it's about growing them. It's about reaching out to people at other ends of the country that you live in or in the county that you live in and building chapters there. Bearing in mind you're constantly going to be in contact with each other, although you could also do the open society route, which is to not really be in contact with each other at all, but just kind of set up all these different chapters that are kind of independent but not. It's entirely up to you. And then you can start thinking about, well, do we start bringing these groups together and trying to form a faction within a political party? That could be one option, but I think that, in my opinion, is far too quick. You're better off forming an even more formal organisation like an NGO or a think tank. And then you can start thinking about joining political parties, running for office, and creating, in America, what they call caucuses, or in Britain, we would call them a faction. And then you can start thinking big and aiming for power. But that's what we should do when it comes to networking. We need to start small and work our way up. And then once you've done that, you can actually start going to other countries and networking there. Obviously, it's easy with the internet to always keep in touch with these people, but once you've got the money and the resources to make it physical, do it as soon as you can. And then the next thing is activism, because networking is a part of that too. They all kind of feed into each other, but I think it's about time that activism is required. And this can be done not only in groups, it can be done on an individual level, but obviously it depends on the size and the scale. One individual or a couple of individuals can join a school board that could potentially prevent progressive degeneracy being taught to kids in those schools. You don't realise how much power you actually have on a school board. You can veto quite a lot of stuff. Although some people would balk at this, and I've had discussions with people about this and they don't like it. Protests can also be organised, but here I have a caveat. We should organise protests, but I do not believe that when the left does it, they do it to show how powerful they are. Sometimes they do, but I think by and large, most of it is not showing how powerful they are. It's a different motive entirely. Protests very rarely force political change unless something drastic happens, unless some politician or group of politicians see the extent that the whole country's against them. Say if the protest is nationwide, they might enact change, or they might even, well, in the case of 1989, in the Velvet Revolution, which was pretty much almost entirely protests, aside from Romania where it did get violent, you will see some protests like that outright depose regimes. But in our day and age, that doesn't really happen much. They follow something more along the line of the American civil rights movement. Their protests weren't necessarily there to force change, although it would have been welcomed if they had done. No, what the protests did was essentially a public relations move. They were trying to show to mainstream America, these black civil rights activists, that they were just like them. They were civilized, they were Christian, they were well-behaved people, and they just wanted equal rights, at least in the South, because in the North it was different. And it worked, because Martin Luther King was smart and realised, quite wisely, and this may have been from philosophical convictions anyway, I'm not so sure, that non-violence was the way forward, because it looks bad when they're rioting against the police and enemy activists, and it makes mainstream America think, well, they're just thugs like we always thought they were. But being peaceful and being attacked rather wantonly as they were by the authorities whilst not resisting created the image that these people really were victims, which they were. It made the mainstream Americans in the South and in the North realise, oh wait, yeah, this is bad. I may not necessarily agree with them, I may not necessarily even like these people, but this is insane. Why are they being hosed down? Why are they having dogs set upon them? They're not rioting, they're actually doing what any American would do in that situation. They're exercising their right to freedom of assembly. And that's what we should do when we decide to protest. It's not about trying to force a change. That's never going to happen. The aim is to create a public relations marketing campaign, essentially. That's what we're going to be doing. We will be making the normies look at us and think, well, you know, I might not necessarily agree with them, I might not necessarily like these people, but the police have no right to do that, and I think potentially they might even have a point, because if we look as normal as they do, we're reaching out to them, and we're making the left and we're making the authorities look bad as a result. But these PR campaigns require us to be on our best behaviour, much like how MLK had to make sure that the civil rights movement protests were also on their best behaviour. Because in this day and age, it's far more easier to manipulate and spread false images and videos about us and make out that we're rioting thugs. But there's a secondary and possibly even more important aspect to the protests, which is, once again, linking to the first thing, networking. These protests will allow people to network. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if a lot of the left-wing protests that we see currently, especially with the pro-Palestinian ones, a lot of networking is being done. People are meeting each other and chatting and getting phone numbers and Facebook friend requests and Twitter follows, other things like that, email addresses, and they're networking. And they're forming new alliances, coming up with new ideas, and as a result, they'll actually be stronger for it. And that's what we should do. Another thing that we could do in regards to activism, apart from going into the very local areas like school boards, joining groups and societies and things like that, is to do a little bit of cheeky subversion. Doing a little bit of something that might be considered manipulation, but when the left do it, it's all fair game. And that is, you should join the opposition political parties. And this is an idea that I've seen spread around quite a lot in right-wing circles, but not something that we should do ourselves, but what the left-wingers do to us. Essentially what will happen is, if there is a primary, a local one, in America, especially if it's a Republican one, leftist activists will either join the Republican Party if it's not an open one, because there are places where there are open primaries, which means anybody can vote, and then vote for the worst candidate en masse to make sure that that candidate wins, and that the actual candidate that they want to win, the leftist one, wins the penultimate election when it happens. And I think that's what we should do, because we've already seen it happen in real time. Just look what happened a few years ago when Jeremy Corbyn was elected Labour leader. Before that happened, Labour had actually reduced price of membership to about, was it £3 a month? Something very, very cheap, which allowed the communists and Momentum to come in, and I assume he must have already had contacts with them, and they managed to mobilise and vote him in. Obviously, in this case, this was their preferred candidate that they wanted to take control of the party, and this was a unique situation where essentially Labour had lost 2 elections on the bounce using neoliberal candidates, and the Blairite faction was in its weakest position yet, even weaker than where Keir Starmer is currently, I would argue. And this confluence of events allowed him to be elected, and this allowed the far left faction to get into power, essentially. And that's what we can do, not only in the Labour Party by making sure that we get the craziest, most lunatic, most useless member elected to leadership, but we can also do that to, say, other parties, like the Conservative Party, which again, where networking and creating factions comes into it. Although there is a dearth of talent in the Tory party right now, there are some candidates, in my opinion, that are red-pilled enough to at least get some of our goals achieved, and with the right backing, with the right counsel, with the right advisors, could get a lot of things done and a lot of ground won against the left and their institutional power. Obviously, they won't be able to do this alone. It would require our own activists to take back the civil service and education and the universities and things like that. But getting somebody like that into Parliament would go a long way to helping us. Likewise, making sure that you get MPs that are very good at subversion, to subvert social justice offices. Like, for example, our current Minister for Equalities, she's, I think, doing a very good job in subverting the post. She is taking to task the left and other factions within Parliament and using the post to push a Conservative Party line. And she's actually not blue-pilled, unlike a lot of her other MPs. I don't think she's Prime Minister material, but her role as a subverter to reclaim our institutions, and if we're going to have these roles, which I think is a waste of state power and resources, what better person than her in these roles to make sure that the left can't get what they want all the time? I think that would work. But anyway, I think they're just a few ideas that we could do to at least try out. There's no harm in trying these out, and we will make mistakes. There's no doubt about that. We're going to make mistakes. We're not always going to win. We're going to lose a few battles. But when have I ever said that things were going to be a perfect, seamless, short ride? No, I've always said it's going to take decades. I always said there was going to be battles we were going to lose, but this is a war, and war takes time to win. But anyway, this video has gone on long enough, far longer than I intended it to be. So, until next time, it's been your boy, and I'll see you all later.